Picture this. You're a surgeon operating on a patient who's bleeding out while their heart rate drops dangerously low. Every move to fix one problem worsens the other. Welcome to stagflation, the economic equivalent of this medical nightmare, where rising unemployment collides with persistent inflation, while growth grinds to a halt. The Federal Reserve finds itself holding the scalpel, and their hands are starting to shake. We're witnessing something extraordinary unfold in the American economy. A discordant orchestra, where every section plays in a different key. Consumer spending hasn't vanished. It's concentrated, like water through a narrowing funnel, with the top tenth of households now driving half of all consumption. Half of America's economic engine runs on 1/10 of its population. The Fed is basically trying to perform surgery, while Congress sets the operating room on fire. This isn't your grandfather's recession or your mother's inflation crisis. We're entering uncharted territory, where traditional economic medicine becomes poison, and the cure threatens to kill the patient faster than the disease. The term stagflation sounds clinical, almost boring. But make no mistake, this economic chimera has toppled governments, sparked social upheavals, and transformed prosperous nations into cautionary tales. America's economic vital signs tell a fascinating lie. Unemployment sits at just over 4%. Historically reasonable, inflation has cooled from its pandemic peak of over 9% to around 3%. Yet beneath this seemingly healthy exterior, the patient's organs are failing. Consider the jobs market's greatest magic trick, making over 800,000 positions vanish in the largest employment revision in American history. Survey response rates have cratered to below half their pre-pandemic levels. The result is economic data that resembles a funhouse mirror, distorted, unreliable, and increasingly divorced from reality. The underemployed Uber driver with a master's degree doesn't register as unemployed. The freelance graphic designer cobbling together 15 clients to make rent technically counts as employed after just one billable hour per week. Labor force participation has dropped from nearly 70% at the millennium's turn to barely above 60% today. Millions of ghosts who don't haunt our unemployment statistics. Inflation measurements suffer from similar blindness. While officials celebrate moderating price increases, they overlook shrinkflation's silent theft and quality deterioration. Housing costs, which consume over a third of typical budgets but represent only a quarter of CPI calculations, devour paychecks like termites in a wooden house. Even achieving the Fed's sacred 2% inflation target offers cold comfort when prices have already jumped by nearly a third since 2019. That purchasing power is gone forever, like youth or your faith in economic statistics. 3 hurricanes are converging on the American economy simultaneously, each feeding off the other's energy. First comes the debt deluge. Federal debt now exceeds $30 trillion, over $100,000 per citizen, $250,000 per taxpayer. Recent policy shifts have created a peculiar alchemy, slashing tax revenues while maintaining or increasing spending. It's like quitting your job while doubling your mortgage. International creditors see this trajectory and demand higher interest rates to compensate for the declining dollar's future purchasing power. Treasury yields have jumped from under 1% to over 5% in 3 years. China's treasury holdings have dropped from over $1 trillion to under $800 billion. They're choosing gold's ancient stability over America's IOUs. This creates a death spiral where interest payments, now consuming roughly $1 trillion annually, about 15% of the federal budget, force more borrowing, which demands higher rates, which requires more borrowing. The second hurricane arrives as trade policy becomes a wrecking ball, swinging wildly through global supply networks. This uncertainty forces companies to build expensive redundancies, adding double-digit percentages to operational costs that land on consumer receipts. Tariffs inevitably transform into consumer taxes. A quarter-rate tariff on Chinese goods doesn't punish China. It punishes Americans buying Chinese-made products. It's arithmetic, not ideology. The third hurricane is the K-shaped catastrophe, reshaping America's economic landscape. Current fiscal policy pours rocket fuel on wealth divergence. Tax cuts for high earners inject cash into narrow markets. Luxury real estate, fine art, premium consumer goods, creating inflation hotspots that eventually spread like wildfire. Manhattan penthouses jumped by nearly a third, while middle-class homes stagnated. This concentration of consumption creates employment paradoxes. Why hire 10 workers to serve 100 middle-class customers when you need only 2 to serve 10 ultra-wealthy ones? The economy transforms from a bustling department store into an exclusive boutique where most people can only window shop. Central banks typically fight inflation by raising rates or combat unemployment by lowering them. But stagflation presents them with a patient who's both freezing and burning simultaneously. Lower rates to boost employment? Asset prices explode while inflation accelerates. The S&P 500 doubles while grocery bills do the same. Raise rates to tame inflation? Unemployment surges past 7%, while small businesses collapse under debt burdens. There's no winning move, only degrees of losing. Of course, optimists point to American resilience and technological innovation. They're not entirely wrong. America has survived the 1970s stagflation, the savings and loan crisis, the dot-com bubble, and 2008. But they're betting on precedent in unprecedented times. Never before has America carried this much debt while facing demographic decline. Never has wealth concentration reached these extremes in a democratic society. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. America's stagflation won't stay quarantined within its borders. The dollar's role as the world's reserve currency, still used in nearly 9/10 of international transactions, means American economic sneezes cause global pneumonia. Emerging markets with dollar-denominated debts totaling over $10 trillion face potential bankruptcy as their local currencies buy fewer dollars needed for repayment. When the world's largest economy stumbles, everyone trips. History offers grim tutorials in stagflation management. Fed Chair Paul Volcker's early 1980s interest rate hikes, reaching 20%, finally slayed inflation, but triggered severe recession. Unemployment exceeded 10%. Manufacturing employment fell by a quarter. Countries escaping stagflation typically require fundamental economic restructuring that takes years and inflicts short-term pain on constituencies politicians prefer to protect. America faces a choice between controlled descent and uncontrolled crash. Controlled descent means accepting recession to reset economic fundamentals. Portfolios shrinking by roughly a third while unemployment reaches high single digits. Uncontrolled crash looks like currency crisis, sovereign debt default, and economic collapse that makes 2008 seem gentle. This path ends with forced austerity and generational economic scarring. Neither option wins elections. The question isn't whether America will pay for its economic sins, but whether payment comes through organized bankruptcy or chaotic default. So what can you actually do? Lock in variable rate debt now. Target recession-resistant employment sectors, healthcare, government, utilities, discount retail. Diversify beyond dollar-denominated assets. Build an emergency fund covering 6 to 12 months of expenses. If nearing retirement, stress test your portfolio against major market declines and sustained inflation above 7%. Most importantly, develop skills that remain valuable in economic turmoil. Plumbers survive recessions better than middle managers. Economic statistics lag reality by months or years. America might already be stagflating without knowing it. The canaries in this coal mine are already gasping. Credit card delinquencies have jumped by half year over year. Small business closures exceed new formations for the first time since the last crisis. Median home prices now require over 40% of median income for mortgage payments, up from the historical quarter. Nearly a third of young adults have moved back with parents, the highest since the Great Depression. The next 18 months will reveal whether American policymakers possess the wisdom to administer painful but necessary medicine. Watch for bond market revolts If Treasury auctions fail to attract buyers at rates below 7%, the game changes dramatically. Central banks dumping dollar reserves would trigger currency crisis, making imports drastically more expensive overnight. Economic distress historically produces political extremism, potentially shattering America's fragile social cohesion when coordinated response is needed most. Venture capital investment has already dropped by over a third as companies hoard cash rather than investing in research. Economic uncertainty kills innovation. The very innovations that might save us wither on the vine. Stagflation represents economics' cruelest joke, simultaneous inflation and stagnation that mock traditional remedies. America stands at the precipice, possibly already falling but not yet feeling the impact. Solutions exist but require political courage approaching martyrdom. Leaders must tell constituents that prosperity was partially illusion, that bills have come due, that sacrifice is mandatory, not optional. Most critically, Americans must abandon the fantasy that economic laws bend to political will. Math doesn't negotiate. 2 plus 2 equals 4 whether you vote red or blue. The longer reality is denied, the harder the landing becomes. The question isn't whether America can avoid stagflation. That ship has likely sailed. The question is whether it can manage stagflation before stagflation manages it. History suggests the odds aren't favorable. But then again, America has surprised before. Time will tell if this is another chapter in American resilience or the opening paragraph of decline. Either way, buckle up. The ride ahead promises to test everything Americans believe about their economy, their politics, and themselves. The surgeon's hands are trembling. The patient's vital signs are failing. And we're all in the operating room. What happens next will echo for generations.